Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in to another episode here. My name is Dominic and I am the host of the Android Factory. In the last episode we went ahead and implemented a little bit of our paging source here, or at least began our implementation here with paging 3. Starting with our paging source, we've created a repository to fetch a particular page here from our API. We've defined a response here, and then we just have our client and our service here updated with the information that we need to hit the correct endpoints. And I think that's all we're going to need from these files for now, so I'm just closing them as we go here. But just in case you are not aware, I would definitely recommend going back and watching the last episode. It'll make this one make a little bit more sense. But here we have a page list of characters. This is currently implemented with Android's Paging 2 library and Epoxy. However, we have another section of the app here where we're going to build out our episodes. This is also a paged endpoint, and I've decided to tackle paging 3. So this app will demonstrate how to use both paging 2 and paging 3, and maybe even covering the migration from paging 2 to paging 3, since paging 2 is now deprecated once we implement paging 3. But anyway, let's jump right back into the work that we had done previously in the last episode. And it looks like here, thinking about it afterwards, we actually need to do something about our, sorry, not our previous key, but our next key here, because we will just constantly fetch the next page here. We don't really have a way of determining when this is done. So we need to clean that up, and then we obviously need to implement our network call here. So looking back at our data source here, if you've seen the series before, you'll understand that there was a function, a little helper function that I built in here to get the next indexed from the next string. And what I mean by that is simply in the documentation here, all of these page endpoints have this little info metadata in the response, and there is information for the next and the previous keys. So obviously this is the first page, so previous is null, and in the last page, next would be null. But other than that, since this is the first page, we can see here that the next page is episode page equals 2. So I've just simply defined a function in here that splits the string based on this exact delimiter, and then we get what comes after it, converting it to an int. So I'm just going to copy this function here and basically, nope, not in the fragment, but paste it inside here so that we get this helper functionality inside of here. Then we can jump up here and implement our network call. So let's go ahead and say page request equals our network layer dot API client dot get episode page. We need a page index, which we will use page number for, and oh, wow, I didn't even realize this, but load is a suspend function, so we actually don't even need our coroutine scope inside of this class. That is wonderful. Very good news. Very happy to see that. Can this all fit on one line now too? Yeah, maybe not. Okay, so that's very nice to know that this load function is being invoked inside of the suspend, so this is kind of already set up to be a part of Kotlin coroutines and work well with it. So that is just very nice to see. So then we can check here if our page request is successful. We're going to negate that, check that if it is not successful, and then we will return a load result dot error. And then in this case here we have a throwable. So we do actually have an exception here. Instead of maybe checking for the is successful case or the is not successful, we can just wrap this the other way and say page request dot exception, because that is nullable. So in the event that that is a non-null field, we can then say return with the error with it. So then we can just get rid of this if statement. So it's a little bit more bulletproof, but basically in any error case, we just go ahead and propagate that error. And then here we need to actually, instead of just saying page number +1, what we need to do here is say get page index from next, and then we will say page request dot data, page request dot body dot info dot next. And this works properly. As I mentioned before, it takes a nullable string, gives you back a nullable int, and this will just either fetch the next page or return null if the next key, if we're at the end of the list here. So this seems to be about it. So I've realized here that we are just going to bypass our repository, which I don't know how I feel about that, but let's just continue with it at this point in time. And then the only other thing here is that in the success case, our data right now is set to an empty list, so we actually need to go ahead and get the information out of our request. We'll go ahead and say page request.body.results, and then we will call map, and we will take the episode mapper.build from it, and we are all good. So this will go ahead and fetch all of the results that exist inside of our response here, which is a list of get episode by ID response. And then we're going to map them using our episode mapper, which we've created in a previous episode, that literally just stuffs them all into a domain model here. It just converts a network model to a domain model quite simply. And so for now, that is good enough. I actually think this is the end of our implementation here. I do think that we will eventually want to make use of this repository, but just because it's not set up properly at the moment, we're just going to access the API client directly just to proceed with the tutorial here and get something on screen. So flipping back to the documentation here, the next thing that we need to do is set up a stream of paging data. We can go ahead and do this inside of our view model, but essentially we're going to make use of flow with the different the paging source that we've defined, a little bit of a paging config here that will define a little bit of information about the paging endpoint, and then we will go ahead and make use of this flow to integrate it with not a recycler view adapter, but instead the Epoxy implementation for paging 3 to get things up and running here. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this really quickly, bounce back here. We will take our episodes view model, create a class. This is going to be the Android X lifecycle view model, and we can just paste this stuff in here. Obviously, some of this stuff isn't going to work, but other stuff will. So we're just going to, instead of example paging source, we have our episode paging source. This requires the repository, which we'll leave right now as a private variable here. Add that in here, and then import this cached in here just to get everything up and running. But additional properties, paging config, such as prefetch distance, and inside of here we have page size, prefetch distance, enable placeholders. That's default to true. I think we might want to cut that. Okay, I'm going to take a look at our characters view model because we have a paged, so we have our constants.page size here, constants.prefetch distance, which I think equals 20, and then 20 times 2 to load in 2 additional pages there. So we're going to say page size equals this, the prefetch distance equals constants.prefetch distance, and then enable placeholders we're going to set to false right now so we don't have to worry about nulls in our view layer, if that works the same as paging 2. Okay, we can create an instance of this inside of our fragment, so we're going to go ahead and create a view model of type episodes view model by view models, and that will scope this view model to the lifecycle of this activity, or this fragment, excuse me, and then the view model dot flow collect latest, which unfortunately is in a needs to run inside of a coroutine scope here, so we'll use our lifecycle scope, and we will collect the latest, and then inside of here we have our paging data that is of type paging data of type episode, and then in here we will go ahead and add to our epoxy implementation here. So I think the next logical step here is to go ahead and create our epoxy controller. So let's go ahead and create the episode list epoxy controller. I apologize for any weird noises that you're hearing in the background. My cats are going absolutely wild right now, and there's not much I can do about it. So we are going to extend the paging data epoxy controller of a particular type. That type is going to be an episode here inside of our domain model. Seem to be getting a small little warning here to add a particular annotation to this class. So just going to go ahead and do that to get the IDE looking clean, and then implement our simple function, the build item model, which is going to return a particular position and an item here for us to bind. We need to return an epoxy model here, so you know the deal if you've seen this before. We're going to create our episode epoxy model here, give it a little bit better name, episode list item epoxy model. This is going to take an episode and also an on click here of the episode, which will just simply return probably the string. Nope, it's an integer for the ID. And then we will extend our view binding Kotlin model, and now we need to go ahead and create our layout file to inject in here. But before we do that, we can simply implement this function since we know what the deal is. We're going to go ahead and return an episode list item epoxy model that has the particular item. So we will say episode equals item, asserting non-null, because again, I believe setting placeholders to false will ensure that we don't get this as a null. But we can clean that up in the future for sure. And then otherwise, our onClick is going to be something that looks like this. And we will have to implement that. Okay, and so I know this is screaming at us here to implement the rest of this class here, but I do just want to bounce out to the fragment here and get this layer set up. We're going to create an epoxy controller, which is going to equal the episode list epoxy controller. Again, we're getting this little warning here, so I guess we can just go ahead and do that as well. I'll look into that and see why it's screaming at us, but we will continue on here. And then otherwise, all we really need to do is say epoxy controller submit data, our paging data, and no errors there. That is wonderful to see. And then the last little bit here is, oh, yep, we do not have this was commented out. So we're going to uncomment this really quickly. We're going to remove this blank text view here. We are going to clean all this stuff up so that it looks fine. And now we have an epoxy recycler view taking up the entire screen, match, padding, item spacing will leave. I think we can just go with a linear layout for the time being. That's my thought. Span count is no longer necessary, and the item count is helpful for sure. We can update the list item here so that our little preview looks a little bit more relevant once we get our layout file up and running for the epoxy model. But instead, or in the meantime, we're just going to set the epoxy controller dot set controller our epoxy controller. And so that's about it. This is all that we need to do at the view layer. From my understanding, we have our epoxy controller. We go ahead and set that controller on our recycler view, and then whenever we get our information back here from the flow, from the whole paging source object, we will simply just pass that on to the epoxy controller, and it will do the rest for us. So I'm going to have to go ahead and build out a really quick layout file so that we can get something on screen, but I do have an idea for the future, or for, I guess, the final product of what this is going to look like, so I'm excited to get that going. So I just created a blank layout file here. Of course, we have our constraint layout, and we set the height to be wrap content because we obviously want this to not take up the entire height of the screen. So because we do have our layout file constructed, we can go ahead and pass in the binding here, the model episode list item binding. Again, we can pass in our layout that we need as soon as we import our R, episode list item, and then we can implement the single bind function that we will or at least override it, and then we need to obviously implement it once we get this layout up and running here. So give me a little bit. I'm going to think about something to build out for our layout, just so we can get something on screen, and then we'll pick it back up from there. Alright, so thanks for watching, everybody. Welcome back. But I've gone ahead and updated or created a simple layout here that just has our episode name. Maybe make this a little bit bigger. Episode name, the air date, and then the little like season 01, episode 01 kind of information. Just pretty simple here, just so we can get this up and running. And then I've just gone ahead and, oh right, I created a little drawable here just to basically make a black or whatever the dark color here is, whatever the color on our surface is going to be, so that it supports dark and light mode. Black, whatever that color is, rectangle, and then the bottom left radius of 4 dp. So we can go ahead and, if you look very closely, you can see that this has a little bit of a rounded corner, whereas all of these other ones are just the straight hard edge. Just to, give it a little bit of a nice touch to it. And yeah, that's about it. We will move on from here. At this point, inside of here, we can update some of the information. So episode dot, unfortunately, this is also called episode. So maybe we'll refactor that a little bit. We will handle our to-do or our on-click momentarily here, but let's see. I think that's about it. So I do want to give this a run and see where we end up here. And so we're rebuilding here, launching the application. This screen should be unaffected here, but when we click on our all episodes, yep, I mean, that had to happen, right? Of course it wouldn't work in the first try. Let's see what the case is. Oh no, I was so close. If this is the only reason that it crashed, I'm definitely going to be upset. No way. Okay, so the issue here is inside of our epoxy model here. We've gone ahead and returned an epoxy model, but as we know, epoxy needs to work or works on an ID for its positioning, its diffing, all of that goodness that comes out of the box with epoxy. So we are going to say episode.id and use that as our, going to concatenate it a little bit here with the string episode and then pasting that in just like that, only because like I think this ID might be 1 and that seems like we might use that ID elsewhere for something else, so prefixing it with episode is a pretty safe bet. So let's see if it works now, and if we click on our little all episodes, wow, so close to getting it to work on the first attempt there. Give me a thumbs up for the valiant effort. Almost had the entire Epoxy or Paging 3 implementation done without trying it once, but obviously it was too good to be true. So we can see here that our information works. Our paging implementation works. We have this nice little, information being displayed all on here. I mean, we could fact check this to see, but it looks like, January 13, January 20, 27, that looks like it's on a weekly schedule right there, so I can believe that. So this does look pretty good. It does seem to be going in chronological order. Right, yeah, we have episode 6 on season 4, episode 6 on 2020. That sounds about right. Season 5 is apparently announced and is coming out. I don't know exactly when, but I saw something about it. So if you are a fan of the show, that is fantastic news. What was something that I wanted to do? Oh, we have our last little bit here to say root set on click listener on click with our episode.id. And we are all good there. At this point, that should give us the nice little ripple when we click on the individual item there. But otherwise, we do have Paging 3 and Paging 2 up and running inside of this application, as we can see here. We can see Paging 2 there, and then we have our Paging 3 right here. So that's wonderful news as well. Yep, we get that nice little ripple animation that comes out of the box with material items, which is great. We do have a small issue here as far as the text overlapping and stuff like that, which I was slightly afraid of, but we can very easily clean that up without a problem here in a future episode. But I do have some other intentions here with these particular, or with these cells, to make them a bit more complicated, a bit more interesting, and yeah, we will get to that in a future episode. But for now, this will do it, guys. I'm quite happy with how this is coming out, so if you made it this far in the video, please do drop a like. It really helps me out and the algorithm and the channel, so much appreciated if you go ahead and do that. If you notice you are not subscribed and you have been enjoying the content, please do subscribe. Again, it'll help me out, but it'll also help you out, because it means you're enjoying the content, and I have plans to continue delivering solid content that hopefully you find useful, so we kind of both win there. And that'll do it, guys. So thanks again. Have a good rest of your day, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.